Okay, good morning. If we could people could take their seat and we can get started. So welcome to the plenary session on machine learning for real-time monitoring, earthquake monitoring. The rate at which machine learning has been having an impact in seismology has been really impressive. And nowhere has it been more impressive, I think at least, than in earthquake monitoring, so developing earthquake catalogs from waveform data. So today we're going to hear from 4 expert panelists on this topic. They're going to each take their turn making a few statements, showing a few slides on monitoring from their point of view. And then we're going to open it up for questions from you, those in the audience, as well as people online. So with that, let's get started. And Weiqiang, are you ready? Here's the slide thing.
Thanks.
Go for it.
Great. Hello, everyone. And I'm very honored to join the panel discussions. So I'll first start with some advantage of machine learning to provide some motivations why we want to incorporate all these machine learning and deep learning models into real-time monitoring. So some of you may wonder that the machine learning has been around for a while, why it become more popular now. And one breakthrough is the superior performance of this deep learning, especially deep neural network models. So these models provide a new way to design algorithm. So in the past, we mainly relied on expert knowledge to design algorithms. For example, the widely used STA-LTA algorithms. Now, with deep learning, we can directly use data to design algorithms, meaning that we can use the data we collect to train the weights and the bias of a neural network to mimic the labels we wanted to produce. And in seismology, we are very lucky to have lots of seismic archives, especially those labeled by human analysts. Now they are very useful resources for training these models. So for example, we can easily get millions of manual labels and use them to train a deep neural network model. And although the training can take some time, but after training, the prediction is very fast, so that we can efficiently apply these models to the much larger unlabeled data sets and find many more events. And this approach has been proved to be very successful in many studies to build an improved earthquake catalog. So this data-driven approach also means that if the performance of this model will keep improving as we get more and more data sets. And this has been demonstrated by the improvement of performance of many popular benchmarks in computer science. As you can see from the right figure, the performance on this benchmark has increasing steadily, and these deep neural network models have surpassed the performance of the average human performance. And motivated by this good performance, there are also many open source seismic data sets being collected in the past few years. So as you can see from the left table, there are data sets from regional areas from California, from China, from Italy. And there are also several global data sets, such as the Stanford earthquake data set STED. And in yesterday's session, you probably also have noticed that there are new data sets of teleseismic events and also about OBS, ocean bottom seismometers, and also regional data set from at the Cascadia area. So with this more and more data sets, now in here we have already over 10 million manual labels we can use to improve our models. So you will see more and more deep learning models developed, being developed and more developed now. And in addition to the good performance of these deep neural networks, these models can also be very flexibly applied to different types of seismic data. This is because these deep learning models, it is a general learning algorithm, so it is not designed for any specific data set or specific task, so that it can be applied to any data formats, including image, audio, or text. And here in an example, we developed the FaceNet model to pick the P and S phases on the 3-component seismic data. And meanwhile, we also developed the FaceNet dust model to pick the P and S on dust data. So this is the data recorded using a fiber optic cable. So you can see the data format is very different from seismic data. It now has 1,000 channels and a very dense spatial resolution of a few meters. And because dust is very new, so we do not have a large data set, manually labeled data set yet. And it will be very time consuming and expensive to build such a data set. But there's some connection between the two data formats. The earthquake waveform recorded by seismometer and dust are very similar. So based on this connection, we can use a method called a semi-supervised learning approach to train a machine learning model for dust data without any manual labels and achieve similar performance as FaceNet. So this is just one example. Now, these deep learning models have also been applied to other data like seismic data in borehole, in OBS, and also for lab experiment data. And we will see, in the future, if we have new sensing technology, we can also apply adapted models for this new data. So the last point I would like also to mention is the rapid development of these deep learning frameworks. So these frameworks, such as PyTorch, TensorFlow, and JAX, they are designed for building deep learning models, but they are also very useful tool for conventional seismic data processing. And they are very easy to use based on Python, and also they are super efficient with GPU accelerations. And for example, now in my group, we primarily use PyTorch for processing terabytes of dust data. And with GPU acceleration, the processing speed can be more than 10 times faster. And these deep learning models can also be very easily to deploy in a cloud platform. And so that we can use the abundant cloud computing resources to process large amount of seismic archives. One example is we built the QuickFlow project, in which we try to scale up our deep learning and machine learning algorithms for large-scale data mining tasks. And now at Caltech, there's also another project called Quick2AWS, which we try to deploy all these machine learning and deep learning tools in real-time monitoring. So based on this advantage, I hope these deep learning tools, I think that these machine learning and deep learning tools can be a very effective tool to help us efficiently detect earthquake, process seismic data. And although there are still some limitations of these deep learning tools, for example, being a black box and need a lot of training data, but its application in many studies have demonstrated that it is very effective tools to build an improved catalog with a few times more smaller earthquakes. And so I think it will be also exciting to test all these methods in real-time monitoring to see how it can help us building the routine earthquake catalog. And thank you.
Thanks, Weiqiang. So Lise will go next.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm more of a user of machine learning. So I work at a volcano observatory in La Réunion, so very far from here. And when I arrived there, my role basically was to kind of improve the methodology that we have for automatic detection to monitor the seismic crisis, the seismicity that's going on with the activity in Mayotte. So that was a big question because the data there is very noisy, and so STLTA would not really work. And so I thought about building a new process to do this. And so first, the picker, we had to decide the picker, and so we chose FaceNet because, I mean, it has proven that it works very well, and I'm not saying that just because Weiqiang is here. But the idea was, what do we do after? Because I arrived at the observatory, people had been working there for a long time with a process that worked in other volcanic observatory and things like that. And so the question was how to use it efficiently and to use it fast. Because you never know when an eruption is going to start again or how it's going to move. And so we had to use it fairly fast. And so what we did is that we combined it with earthworm, which has been used for years now in La Réunion and for Mayotte, and also in Guadeloupe and Martinique, which is where the other volcanic observatories, the French ones, are. And so we combined the two methods because Earthworm was already set up, was already being used, and so that was a way for us to really use this new methodology very quickly. And so that's how it took, I mean, it took a year, which is a while, but still, to test FaceNet. So this is this catalog that you see in the figure was the test for FaceNet. Was how does it work? Can we relocate? Can we really use new seismicity? Can we build a catalog? The answer was yes. And so then we made the automatic process using Earthworm. And a year after, it was installed in La Réunion, so for Mayotte, and now it's also in Guadeloupe, it's also in Martinique, it's going to be in the south of France. So we're trying to make it useful for people to detect the seismicity in case an eruption starts again. And so there are also new methodologies that we're going to try, but this always takes a while. When you have to change the whole process, you have to test everything, and so we started with the phase detector, which has already improved a lot what we're doing now, and so we're moving on little by little. And another thing that I wanted to talk about, like just quickly, is that for volcanoes, seismicity is not the only thing we look at, and what we're working on now is trying to combine the different methods that we work on. We detect, well, we measure gas emission, we measure deformation. There are a lot of methodologies that are used on volcanoes to detect if there's going to be an eruption, if there's going to be an eruption tomorrow or in 4 months. And that's I think, a very interesting opportunity because, well, first, it's not easy, but for example, gas emissions show signs that there could be an eruption months earlier. And so if we can combine these different methods, maybe we could get not an exact prediction on when an eruption is going to happen, but at least getting indications like, okay, so it could be in a week, it could be in a month, and I think that's future direction that could be very interesting. Thank you.
Frederik?
Yeah, hello. So in my group, we run a global seismic monitoring service and are also in this way users of machine learning, but also, of course, have graduate students who advance this. And Weiqiang also mentioned the need to have benchmarks and really how the field in seismology, but also globally in machine learning or in other topics, it's really pushed forward by having good benchmarks. And sort of, I would argue it's not enough to have the benchmarks. They also need to be very accessible and ideally accessible through a standard interface so that it is easy to test new models with lots of different benchmarks. And also later, you know, depending on your problem, you might want to use different benchmarks. And also the access to the models. I mean, it is already very good that is really a culture of publishing models in seismology and you know, using TensorFlow and PyTorch, these are very accessible platforms for many people, but for many seismologists also still a bit daunting. So to have something that's even more simplified and even more standardized, it's very useful, and so there can be various platforms. So one of these platforms that does this is the SizeBench, which was developed at GFZ, my institution, and KIT, that combines a lot of already published benchmarks, and it's very extensible. So it's also called to the community to contribute more benchmarks, and also make all the different, not all the different, but many of the different published models available there, with again a call to the community to contribute their new architectures to that. And then that is very useful for practitioners. So using one of these machine learning models, even for someone who has got no idea about the details, is just a bunch of lines of Python, as is shown here. So this is all that is needed to load one of these machine learning models and apply to a seismogram. And also makes it easy then to retrain the different models with different benchmarks and really fine-tune it. So we've heard this example of ocean bottom seismometers, for example. But induced seismicity, again, it's very similar. So one can start with initial models and retrain that. So I would really say that is also something that will help real-time monitoring by building interfaces to standard software like Earthworm or SizeComp. So that is one of the points I want to make here in this introduction. The other one is really something on uncertainty and particular challenges faced for machine learning models. So the pickers that we think of most often, or it had the most impact, I would say, on real-time monitoring, they provide characteristic functions. And these are really confidence levels, but these are not calibrated confidences. We heard about this in the session on machine learning yesterday. And I think the next stage in a way to make this information more useful is really providing proper probabilities and doing proper uncertainty quantification. One example where this is even more obvious, and which also belongs to one of the first problems that in seismology was tackled, is the problem of magnitude estimation. And these are just some figures from different studies, also our own is included to show we are certainly not excluded from that. And on the x-axis is a true value of a magnitude, or the best estimated based on traditional methods, and then on the y-axis is a prediction, often based on very little data with the idea of early warning applications. And one can see in these plots that often looking at the overall statistics, they look really well. Yeah, things are matching very well. There's no bias. There's a little spread, but it's quite small. The error is reasonably small. And yeah, looking at histograms, everything looks fantastic. But looking a little bit more detail at the large magnitudes, you can see this deviation. So on the right, which show magnitude estimates, from a certain magnitude on, things level off, and basically then the true magnitude increases while the prediction doesn't increase anymore, or even worse, you see some points that are really in the field of very ordinary magnitudes. And similar for peak ground acceleration, that show that often for the very largest earthquakes, we have really a breakdown of these models. And of course, the reasons are very well understood. I mean, there's a lack of training data, and there's also some physical reasons related to the old saturation problem. But it doesn't really help in the application. And often it doesn't matter how well the system is performing in an average situation, or it also matters, but it's maybe not the most crucial one. But these very large earthquakes or aftershock sequences that are very dense, this is really the most critical time when we most would rely on these systems to work. And so I think the kind of frontier is really to develop methods that realize when they're going wrong and provide at least a warning. I think fixing that problem will not be easy. And so this is, I think, one of the things we have to face in real-time monitoring, and I'll pass on.
Chris.
So hello. I'm going to sort of represent the real-time network and the operations. And so we've heard a lot about more of the machine learning. And I'm going to take a step back because when I was asked to do this, I was trying to think of what we mean by real-time. And for me, I mean regional seismic network operations. And this is a great slide that was put together by Ben Baker. We do a lot of things in the network, right? We collect data, we build catalogs, we respond to earthquakes. We actually have performance metrics that are given to us by our funding agencies. There's many things we do. So I think when we think about real-time applications of machine learning, we need to think about what that real-time means. And is it regional seismic network operations like I'm doing volcanic monitoring? Is it microseismicity monitoring for induced seismicity? And there's all these different applications. But I think in all of these cases, at least from an operational side, I think one thing that we have in operations is we are resource limited, right? We have to do things on these fixed budgets. And so as we think about adding new things like our little ML square in here, for someone that sort of looks at the budgets and overall operations, how do we make that work in with long-term ownership? And I think Lise was talking about, we can't just drop a module in here. We have to take and very carefully test every aspect of that module before it goes in. We have to make sure it's trained properly, and at the end of the day, are we sort of pulling resources out of some other box so that we can say we do machine learning, or is the machine learning actually adding value to what we're doing? And so I'm a little bit cautious. We have machine learning activities happening at University of Utah. Alicia Armstrong presented a great talk yesterday showing some work in Yellowstone. I think with the swarms that we see in the Yellowstone network, it would be really nice to have some analyst picks. And I also think it's interesting that we keep talking about pickers for real-time, this real-time. But you can see here, we got to do a lot of other things. We've got to associate, we've got to build the event, we've got to get a magnitude. And so there's a lot of these different aspects that I think we need to consider. And when we consider in real time how we're going to do it in a way that's within our resources. So, thank you.
Okay, so those were the 4 perspectives. A nice range of perspectives, I thought. And so now the floor is open for questions, comments, discussion items. So please walk up to the microphone. I think there's one over there and one back there. And we also have people participating online. So we may get questions out of the blue. So yeah, go ahead.
All right, I beat Paul. My question is for, and I forgot your name already, Lise. So you're probably one of the few, are you actually running your machine learning algorithms on real, live, continuous data, streaming data?
Yeah. It's been running for a few years now. Yeah.
So how do you deal with things like gaps? Is it pretty, I mean, this is too much detail, but I think you might be the first actual operational network that I know about doing this in real time on live streaming data. Am I correct?
I'm not trying, I understood
The question I think was, are you is your outfit the first group to do it operationally?
I mean, I honestly don't know. I think there was a big need, there was a particular need in Mayotte because the eruption was so new and the data is so bad. Well, it's so bad, I mean, it's, so just to explain that, is that, so when the seismicity occurred, there was one station on the island, it was an accelerometer, and then people had to install stations extremely quickly. And so it had to be safe, and it had to be at a good location, and the choice was to make it safe. And so basically during the day, the data, we can't really see anything, because they are in schools and places like this. And so during the day, if you look manually, like every day manually, someone looks at the signal, and we still do that. But yeah, during the day, visually you can't really see an event, but with FaceNet we can now. So that was one of the things that anyway it's much better, and we actually see more events than manually during the day. During night, it's the same, but during the day that changed a lot, and that's also why there was such a need. STLTA could not be used, and so that's why we did it very quickly. And then because it worked, the other observatories were interested, and that's how we kind of put them there.
So I think at NEIC, they also use machine learning picks or automatic put in, into their locations as well, although they're reviewed by analysts.
Thanks. If anyone from NEIC is in the audience and wants to confirm, speak up.
To add to that, I think Southern California Network is also doing that. They are doing a project called Quick to AWS, basically building all the workflows on AWS, like the native service, so that you can easily test all these different machine learning tools and see how the whole workflow improves.
But you're not live yet, right?
And I'm not in, yeah. So
okay.
Alan and Clara may have more.
So at NEIC, we are using machine learning operationally, but we're not running it on continuous streams. We use standard STLTA pickers and then do classification and pick timing refinement using machine learning models.
Cool, thanks. Okay.
My question is more philosophical, I think, so it's for anyone who wants to touch it or no one if they want to leave it alone. And so I think in machine learning, what I've heard about different machine learning techniques at any rate is that they act as a black box. We don't really know what's going on thoroughly inside of them in a physics sense. So my question is, can you speak, is anyone willing to speak to that to justify why we should use a black box to do real-time monitoring?
Yeah, so the question to summarize is a black box method okay? Who would like to?
I mean, I can try to answer that. Of course, it's a big question. I think it's black box in the sense that we don't understand, what the individual neurons do and what the purpose is. But I think we can kind of probe the system in a fairly detailed way to understand how, when it will work and when it will not work. And we have to do that. I think that's really a big part of developing models, to really probe the edges, not just look, this is the point I was trying to make as well, yeah, not just look at the average performance, but try to really understand the failure modes. And of course, there are these ideas around explainable AI, so there are different approaches to make it a bit more explainable. In my view, for seismology, that's not necessarily the most important issue, to have something saying, well, we believe that because there's a wiggle there and a wiggle here. In the end, analysts also can't always explain it that well. It's a lot of experience and based on intuition, right? So it's looking at the frequency change, looking at the amplitude, and you kind of, it just looks like an arrival. And I think in some sense, that's what the machine learning models also work. Of course, they will use the amplitude and they'll use the frequency content because that's what's in the data. So I think to me, it's not super crucial, but we really need to probe these algorithms and these models to understand the failure modes.
Yeah, I can. Oh,
Go ahead.
I totally agree. I think it's a lot of trying it with at different places and things like that. For example, with FaceNet, it was trained in California, and so would it work on volcanoes? That was the first question, for example, for us. And so we tried at different places, and we tried for quite a while to see how it works, and it worked much better. It could work better, we could retrain, and that was also a big question. But then it's how much time does it actually save if we have to retrain, and is it going to improve things that much? And for example, for us in Mayotte, if there's going to be an eruption somewhere different, our limitation is not going to be the detection, it's going to be the location, because all the events are at the same place. And so if suddenly they're somewhere else, the model is not going to be good, and that's where our issue is going to be. It's more going to be the location. So it's in terms of what do you actually need to improve the most? And the detection is not the one for now.
Okay, we have a long line, so maybe we should go to the next question. This is great. Yeah.
I guess my question is for anyone up there, because one thing that I'm coming from the seismic network operator perspective, and it's not just cost, but it's also continuity of operations that we have to consider. And I noticed that people have mentioned in passing that they use the cloud. And I know from experience, the internet can and will be cut off in some extreme events. Now, that would mean for operational costs, that you would have to think about having cloud and a local server. And I guess, has anyone considered that there is vulnerabilities in the cloud as far as bringing this into operation?
Yeah, so I think Weiqiang has his head in the cloud, so maybe he could address that one.
Did not get the question clear.
Yeah, so the question I think is how you manage doing things in the cloud, or
no, because the cloud, for continuity of operations, internet and access to the cloud can be cut off in extreme events like Hurricane Maria. And so has anyone thought about how you would actually handle that type of system, where you'd have to either drop back into a different picker, or for operationals, that the cloud is vulnerable?
This is something I'm afraid of, right? Liz, we've talked about this. So we run our stuff on premise. And one of the issues with going to machine learning is just more computationally expensive, right? So having the clouds and the computers in the clouds make it really nice. But to get into, say, AWS, right, then you commit to AWS coding structure and such. And so what happens if either you lose internet or AWS decides to cost so much money we can't pay for it? As a network operation, tomorrow we still have to produce a catalog. So I guess the question is, and I'm naive about the clouds, but if I commit to a cloud, or Liz commits to a cloud, and all of a sudden she loses contact because she's on the island, or I can't pay for it in Utah, I can't lose my operations.
Yeah, my question from that is, if you lose the method, don't you also lose the data anyway? Because that's a big question that we have, is that when sometimes, something happens, we have a cyclone or something, but we also directly lose the data. So my question is more, what do you do with that?
So our data comes in multiple frames. So we have data that comes in on radio, we have data that comes in on internet, and we have data that comes in on cell modems. So we do have data, and it comes in on premise. The issue is how do we get our maybe solutions out if we lose the internet, but we can actually process the data, and we have satellite to actually push solutions out.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's the cloud is very convenient, and it's needed once we go to really massively larger data sets than I think used currently in monitoring. I would say for standard sets of monitoring stations of even a couple of hundred stations, it's quite feasible to do it locally with commodity hardware, with, you know, if you get a desktop with a GPU or a server locally. So the cloud is good and will certainly allow certain developments, but it's not necessary for application of machine learning.
My feeling is, currently we do not have a good cloud, like at least one demo or one system yet. So it may be still worth investigating this, see how good are the cloud, what are the benefits. Then we know, because we know the downside of cloud, like AWS, if we tie to AWS. But we also want to estimate what benefits that can cloud provide us. At least it seems in Southern California, they put the data set in AWS, which increase the data access. They make it much easier to access, which is good. And now they are testing the real system in cloud, and so we'll wait to see how good, like how much benefits can cloud bring us. And another point is currently there are many open source cloud like systems. For example, Kubernetes. It actually can run on both on cloud or any cloud platforms, and also on your on-premise servers, so which actually does not limit you to cloud or local servers.
Great, thanks.
My question was if you could speak a little bit more to quantifying uncertainties, because you'd kind of alluded to how that's, you know, sort of the next frontier of research. And to you, do you think that just means larger models, or, you know, like chaining models together, or maybe using physical constraints? I'm just kind of curious how you think that will look.
So sorry, I missed the question in there.
Yeah, so you said that you think that I think Frederik had said that he thinks that the next frontier is having systems that better understand their uncertainty, so they can more realistically tell when they're potentially giving you a bad result. And I just was wondering what you think that looks like architecturally. Does that just mean larger models, or are there like some other approaches you're thinking about?
So does anyone want to speak to that?
What? Say something.
About quantifying uncertainty methods for doing that.
I have not done. So I think my feeling is like for deep learning now, there are more ways to quantify uncertainties. In the past, we mainly use like Monte Carlo Markov chain to quantify uncertainties. And for neural networks, there are now multiple ways to quantify uncertainties. For example, dropout, or like stochastic weight averaging, and other like methods to quantify. So I think there are more ways to quantify the uncertainties, but it's still pretty hard because the network is very large. So I think it becomes challenging, but we have more options. So.
Yeah, it's part of the front. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's sort of two basic approaches one can take. One is this kind of ad hoc approach, I would say, yeah, of ensemble averaging, training different models, or similar, doing the same model and having the dropout applied stochastically and getting an ensemble of answers and then using that. The other is to include it implicit or explicitly in the modeling. So I mean, so we've been using for the magnitude estimates Gaussian mixture models, and so not trying to make a prediction, but to predict the probability density. And of course, one always has to be careful, is the probability density I predict really the probability density that I get? So are the probabilities calibrated? And I think that's an open question. And of course, that increases the computational load, yeah, and one can see. And I think in a way, that's why I say it's frontier, right? We'll have to see which one works best. And I mean, these ensemble methods are very expensive, but in machine learning, what is expensive is the training always, yeah? So once the model is trained, it's cheap, and particularly for these seismic monitoring needs, it's probably enough to have like a small set of models that are trained for typical data types, so maybe volcanoes and local seismicity, global seismicity, and you don't need to retrain it for every new region. So in that sense, being expensive in training might not be the killer argument against it.
Thanks.
Hi. So my question is that, like, when you were training your model for the real-time monitoring. So how are you considering the physics of different waveform phases? Basically, I can give a small example. Like most of the time, people use the regular Fourier transform, in the time frequency domain to train the model. So I feel that like in couple of phases, like for the surface waves, the Bessel function transform, the frequency Bessel transform, like can extract more signatures than the classical Fourier transform. So are you also considering these kind of things while training the model, or are you considering the just regular kind of transform function while you are like training the waveform to classify different models?
So, did you? I sort of heard only half.
Go ahead. I didn't quite hear.
Yeah, sometimes a little bit difficult to understand here on top. So I think the question is, and interrupt me if I misunderstood. Yeah, is sort of how to decide how to train the model in a way, and I think that's also an open-ended question. I think it matters a lot for the final performance. So ideally, with these these modern deep learning frameworks, we don't have to do the feature engineering, right? So we just throw all the data in there and hope to extract a good result. But still, the way it is presented, I mean, the way whether you normalize or whether you present it in the Fourier domain or in the time domain, it can make a big difference in performance. In the end, I guess we are sort of using trial and error. They're largely also driven by domain. So like all the models we have trained were done in the time domain, just on the waveforms, and actually not very processed waveforms, because we have this real-time application in mind. So then we can train the models giving it 1 second of data, 2 seconds of data, 3 seconds of data, and that's something that is not easily transferred to the Fourier domain, obviously. Yeah? So it's and I think that the kind of key message here is that the application drives the way you train your network. Don't do some idealized training to show that the machine learning works really well, but think about what you really want to achieve, and then optimize your training set for that. So I mean, like another thing we were doing is for this magnitude problem, really showing it, and it's a trivial thing. I mean, machine learners will know this, but to do upsampling of a large earthquakes, yeah, so that at least we mitigate this a little bit. The fact that there are very few large earthquakes and therefore the performance is poor. It doesn't really work that well in mitigating it, but it helps a little bit because we care more about working well for large earthquakes than to work for a typical earthquake, which is small.
There's a question from the internet.
Oh, sorry.
Are you finished with this one, though? I don't want to interrupt. No, the question from the internet is to Lise, and it says, as you mentioned, eruptions are preceded by various signals, one of which is volcanic tremor. Does your study cover analyzing volcanic tremors using machine learning models?
No, first. So volcanic tremor, at least, so we don't see it in Mayotte. We haven't found a volcanic tremor. In Piton de la Fournaise, it happens when the gas starts coming out, so the eruption is already there at that point. So what happens at Piton de la Fournaise is, so you will have signs weeks before, and then you have a few hours. It can go from 10 minutes to a day of seismicity, and then the tremor will start, but that's when the eruption starts. So the main thing is to try to, well, first we pick most of them, and then it's to locate the earthquakes and to see where the magma is going to come out. But once the tremor arrives, the eruption is there already. But I have to say, like I don't know if Cyril is around here, but Cyril Journeau, I don't know if he's here. Yes, he's here. He's been working on locating where the tremor comes out to also locate where the eruption goes. So it's not, I think, well, it works real time, but it's not, we don't have an alert for it, for where that tremor would be.
Hi, I have two questions. The first one might expand on the whole black box question. Are there any studies or analyses on like kernel filters and feature maps from neural nets to know like what the models are learning? Like for each model, if you plot the filter kernels of like outer layers, maybe you can check if the models are learning P onsets and arrivals of S, so that there aren't black box.
Yeah, so there are some visualizations. So we try to understand. So for example, if we check the EQ transformer paper, it looks at how the transformer put the weights on different parts of the waveforms. And also in our recent paper, EQNet, we also plot all the feature space. So from the feature space, we can see something like it may have learned some sharp change from P to noise to P and P to S, and also some is focused on high frequency and some is focused on low frequency. So we can do some visualizations. I think the challenge is we cannot do very systematic analysis about this feature space. We still rely on quite on our intuition to interpret the feature space. But there do have some method. I forgot its name, but there are some ways to analyze or which input. For example, give an image, try to analyze which part of the image the network is more putting more focus on. And see
attention mechanism.
Yeah, for example, if it classify a cast, if it really give a high weight on the area of a cast. So there are some ways to try to understand the neural networks. This also backs to our first question. We try to make the black box more transparent then we can better understand why it's performing good or why it's performing bad, and also maybe can also provide some information about the uncertainties. In some area it may not work, but some area may work very good.
Thank you. My second question is for everyone. Do you think could machine learning enhance workflows that associate, locate, and even retrain models like Logflow or Quakeflow be realistically applied in real time yet, or is that not yet?
So what was the end of that? I didn't quite catch that.
So enhanced machine learning enhanced workflows like Logflow and Quakeflow, yeah. Could they be realistically applied in real time yet, or has that been applied?
Yeah, so for Logflow, it's mainly designed to build a high-resolution earthquake catalog. So it works on archive data. So you need to get the data ready, then go through all these workflows. It will produce you a nice earthquake catalog. And for Quakeflow, we focus on running all the things on cloud. So we kind of focus it on still similar to Logflow to build a good earthquake catalog. We also have a preliminary support for real-time processing. So we add Kafka and Spark streaming services to support real-time processing. We tested in Hawaii. We can build a demo, but I think it seems to Chris the comment. We're still far from operation because we need to do a lot of tests to try to make sure it is working robustly. So if any students are interested in making the system good, we have everything open source online, so you can check and see if you want to improve some part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, in Oklahoma, they're running EasyQuake, and I learned last night that's not in their operational or their real time, but there's other networks running different flavors of ML, but the trick to getting it into operations, I'm going to come back to Lise, is you just have to continue to test and make sure it's going to work, and we got to make sure we're not going to miss the things that are key for operations, like the talk I heard today from Alaska. We can't miss the big earthquakes, right? We got to be careful what we're sacrificing for. So
I can add to that, so it's in real time now, but we still have someone looking at every event, whenever we can. It's just, I mean, it gives us time. Definitely, it helps a lot. And it's also if a crisis happens at night. That's when we're going to need it, because then we can get an alert and someone is going to wake up and look at the events. So it's really helpful, but we're not replacing humans yet.
Okay.
Peggy.
So,
You're next.
Peggy, go ahead.
So in network operations, Chris forgot to mention that the people who use our catalogs are really upset when they change. And my observations of machine learning is you have this system and it's running well, and then you tweak it to make it run better. So if you do that, do you still get the same catalog out of it or not?
Well, Peggy, you're well aware of this, right? It depends on how you tweak it, how you test it, and how you drop it in, I think. And that's part of my concern is in the testing and tweaking and dropping it in, we don't really want to put in a big discontinuity. And if we do, then we have to go backwards and fix everything in the past so that we have continuity within the catalog. And then you really make your end users upset. So
yeah, no, my concern is that after 3 weeks or a month, somebody says, well, this parameter would make it be really a lot better. And then after another 6 weeks, somebody says, we could change this too.
Oh, we don't change things on 6 weeks. That wouldn't happen, I think, in most regional networks. But we have to be really careful because we can't put anything in place until it's tested and vetted, until we know how it's going to change sort of the catalog. And maybe it will provide a good change, and that's what would come out of our testing. But we have to be careful, and so yeah. Sorry, Bill.
But Peggy brings up a good point. These methods are continuing to improve, and so we're going to have to navigate that landscape somehow with network operators and everybody. Right. Bill.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to carry the conversation in a little bit different direction, and maybe it's a little bit following up on what Peggy had started. We've seen that machine learning has been spectacularly successful in doing the things that we already do. So we build catalogs and we put a few numbers in. We have an origin time, a latitude and longitude. If we're lucky, we have a depth. And then we have some way of quantifying, so we put a local magnitude or something on it. There's a lot of information that's still in the seismogram that's still on the table. It would be nice to have a catalog that was much richer, that had seismic moments, maybe had radiated energy, components of the moment tensor, reliable depths for earthquakes that are at multiple distances from the nearest station, et cetera, et cetera. And my question for the panel is, what do you see are the prospects for using machine learning to deepen what we do, and what might be the impediments that would make that difficult to do at this time?
So I think the reason why there has been this focus on the picking and the localization is what Weiqiang was saying in the beginning, that they're huge labeled data sets. And so it was the easiest, you always go for a lowest hanging fruit first, and I think that was clearly the lowest hanging fruit. I think there's certainly potential to go into these areas. Actually, we do have a research project to look at depth phases now and trying to pick depth phases. And you can think of a whole range of things. I mean, I know other groups that have been investigating the moment tensor problem with quite some intensity. But the question is, is always what do you use? So for the supervised approaches, which I think are the best suited here in this case, how do you generate your supervised kind of ground truth data set? And often we don't know the ground truth, right? So I mean, for the depth phase training, we use the EHB catalog or its continuation and done by ISC, yeah, because they're very well manually curated events. But sometimes it's not so obvious. But there's a huge potential, so I think it's going to stay exciting in the next 10 years. Because the picking problem, to be honest, single station picking, I think it's probably reached a plateau that it can be improved, but only marginally, and we really need to look for new problems to gain these huge advantages of machine learning in the future. Does that answer it, or I guess others can chip in?
Maybe others want to.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what others have to say. I guess part of the thinking is that, yes, machine learning has to date depended upon having labeled data, and we've had that richness. But where does machine learning go beyond, where maybe labels are inadequate or there are other ways of generating what might be training?
So I'm going to venture out on like the edge of my knowledge. So when I fall off the cliff, someone correct me. But there's like some new techniques with autoencoders and different learning algorithms where you put the waveform in and allow the machine to extract features. And whether or not those features have any physical meaning, I'm not an expert enough to say. But I think there's some other techniques where you aren't limiting yourself to what we necessarily know, and you just say, here's the waveform, and there's some really creative ideas right now coming out with that. I think, and in addition to some of the lists that Frederik said, I mean, there's been lots of work in source discrimination as well, and that's not the specific things you said, but it's also sort of looking at more of a full waveform approach versus what we just do in sort of an operational sense. So there's a lot of creative solutions out there. I'm kind of I just throw out autoencoders because that's the only word I know, but I think there's some other aspects in sort of the same family of learning that will allow you to sort of pull more information out of the waveform. But I think the tricky thing is coming back to how you interrogate the black box to know what the machine learned, and that's what's going to take the trick to link it back to what you're talking about, in my opinion.
I think this is something I think also very hard about. Like, kind of the breakthrough is mostly from supervised learning. Like, we know we can do the job well, and the machine can help us find many more, make our task much easier. But ideally, I think we want to not only know the signal we already know, we also want to know there are many information in the waveform. So we want the machine help us to find what we know, like P and S wave, and also maybe noise. But there are also different signals in the waveforms. Maybe we do not fully understand. Hopefully, there could be ways to find all these signals, not PNS, not noise, or other new signals. So in the past, in graduate group, there is a method called FAST. It's actually, I think, it's a powerful method. It's like unsupervised learning approach. So I think we need to jump out maybe from supervised a little bit, try to use the machines. Its advantage is it can process large data efficiently. So we want to maybe try unsupervised learning approach to find all these pattern signals, repeating signals, but we do not know. Then we can analyze what are these signals represent, what are physics behind these signals. So this is an unsupervised learning approach, and also now they are in the computer science field, they are trend using self-supervised learning approach. So I think many people may have tried like GPT or ChatGPT recently, and to train this kind of model, they do not use manual label data. They collect the whole internet for training, and let the machine to learn from text, from news, from maybe papers, to automatically learn some common knowledge about how our language is formed, what are the common sense are behind all these languages. So I think there is some potential in this direction. We use all the data to training, but not supervised, maybe self-supervised. Try to let the machines to find the patterns in the data. Some patterns we may not know. And this may address some of the Bill's question.
Yeah.
So I have a question also related to uncertainty, because a lot of the models I've seen, when they train, they only use as the labels, they only use the arrival time. But the catalogs right now made by analysts, they also sometimes have the error, or they have some quality label attached to it. I just wonder if we could somehow input that information in the training process, would improve the models, or even could be used to get similar metrics that then could be compared to the traditional catalogs.
So Alicia Armstrong gave a talk yesterday that I think where some work that she's been doing, we've been doing at the university, well, we have been doing at the University of Utah for that exact thing, and I believe it's called SWAG is the model, which is, here I go on the edge of my knowledge again, an approximation of like an ensembling approach, but what it's really trying to get at what you were talking about, sort of those traditional errors that we had on PICs and how you deal with it. So I think there's methodologies, and Alicia's getting great results on something like that, but from an operations point of view, that's really important, right? How do we, and going back to what Peggy was saying, how do we link back to what we've done in the past? We really have to address this uncertainty issue in a way that's meaningful for what we've done for operations.
This has been a really good conversation. We talked about uncertainty and risks that are involved, and we're trying to figure out as a community, how do we go forward from here? There's a lot of opportunity. You know, we talked about black box, talked about internets going down. What I want to know is, how do we know that it's the right thing to do? How do we say, yes, we're all in on AI, ML, let's do it. And I'm trying to think about how to ask this question in a very succinct way. But maybe we could talk about different ways that we know that it's the right thing to do. And maybe it could be, okay, we have a vetted process of verification validation. That might be one of the ways we approach it, that we know that it's the right. or we identify opportunities that we say, hey, the reward is just so damn high that we're okay with the risk of doing this. And the people that are working on the networks, I guess I want to hear from you when you know that it's the right thing to do and we're all in on it.
Yes, so who would like to?
I can start. So I guess it's almost a really philosophical question again. And to some extent, I think it will just develop. So some networks will be more courageous because maybe they have, less responsibilities in a way that if they get it wrong, it's not such a huge disaster, so they can afford to be more experimental. And they'll adopt it, and then other groups will see it's working well, and I think then it's kind of a trickle-down process, or maybe in a bad case, they come and say there's a magnitude 8.5 in the Bay Area, and it all turns out to be wrong, and then it will throw it back a few years. Yeah. But I think that they thinking about it a bit more systematically. I think this benchmarking is again a good concept, and so far the benchmark have been these curated data sets of various qualities. But we could also think of having some kind of real-time testing service, if you so want. So I mean, there is a testing center for prediction, yeah, for these earthquake prediction forecasting people, to really test the power looking forward. And in a way, maybe as a community, we should think about establishing some kind of facility for testing new ideas or new algorithms. And I think, the picking, I think, is less critical. But if you go to these more magnitude determination and focal mechanism determination, then it becomes maybe a little more critical, these questions. And so I just throw out that idea, yeah, that there would be something nice to do if someone finds the resources to set it up. That would be great. Yeah, I'll let someone else continue.
I feel like I keep jumping in, but I'll jump in again. I think there's the issue of vetting the models, which is going to be really important, but I also have to ask the question, what is my gain, right? STA, LTA is cheap, it's easy to run, it's worked for years and years and years. I don't miss the big earthquakes. I don't have to have any fancy computers, and it works until we get an aftershock series or we get a large swarm, and as in operations, we get inundated. So I can look at, when? Well, when I need to continue to make that catalog and we're overwhelmed. So can I bring in some modules that have been specifically trained to solve some specific problems that I have as an operation? I think that's a clear case there. And I'm blanking on other clear cases, but I think other operators can tell you there's really specific times, and I'm sure in the volcanoes and such, you can think of times when the cost benefit is really high versus, wow, I'm just going to produce more picks and I'm going to produce more events. That's a little scary for me as an operator. So that's a really good question you ask.
Can I just make an observation based on your responses? One of the ways that we could go forward is everyone goes at their own, and it's a slow process of trial and error. But the other way I think you're saying is we really try and probe the boundaries of this model. And I don't think it's the test train sets, because we're not thinking of the ways that it's going to break. If we could come together as a community and make like a comprehensive way to know the limits of that black box, then I think as a community we might be more happy to work within the defined areas, but it's really difficult to know what you don't know, and how do you vet that model?
So I'm not sure who's next. So
Clara, you go.
Okay. Yeah, so in recent years, there have been so many new advances from the scientific community. Machine learning algorithms that could potentially improve the quality of our earthquake catalogs. But a lot of the regional seismic networks, including in Southern California, where I'm from, we're using AQMS. We've been using the same software that's over 20 years old, and it's really difficult to get these latest scientific advances into our seismic network operations. And so I'm just asking, there's a disconnect. So what are the reasons why? What are the barriers, and what are kind of the roadblocks into being able to get the latest science into operations? Is it a matter of just resources, or is it a matter of, well, do we really need these algorithms? Or I just want to know your thoughts on that. What's taking so long, and why is it so difficult to go from
My before after I at the Caltech, then I learned more about how the network system works. That I realized our focus is very different. For the operational, so we want to make sure we catch all these large earthquakes 100% sure. But for research focus, these large earthquakes may be not that interesting to us. So we analyze the biggest one, the main shocks one, and so my research is a lot of small earthquakes. Then these small earthquakes for operational purpose may be not that important. So I think our focus may be not exactly the same. But I think the same thing is we're now seeing all these technologies are developing fast. It can definitely help the monitoring. But as you mentioned, the kind of system is very hard to add the new models to the current systems. So it would be good that we have a very modular systems which can both use for research and also for operations. And we can have good test and benchmark. Research is like explorational side to explore the limits of these algorithms. Then if we find these are very robust, then we can quickly move. If we have same system, then we can quickly move to operation.
Okay. We're officially out of time, but I'm happy to go longer. I don't know about the rest of you.
Owen has some things to say about our experience with the cloud in Southern California.
Yeah, well, actually, I was just going to maybe elaborate a little more on Chris. I think Jesse asked, what are the gains that network operators, would be looking for? And so I just wanted to elaborate on that. So for example, after when a large sequence starts, there's just so much energy sloshing around that the STA-LTA picker does not do a good job at all. And there's a lot of splatter, and it takes a lot of analyst work power. And there may be just events that they just can't tease out. Also, things where, let's say, 4 shocks are very close to the main shock. Again, that might cause an error in magnitude calculation. So that would be, or telesize detection. These are, there are many problematic events that if this could be further automated to reduce error, reduce workload, so that the very limited resources we have, we can focus on, let's say, data quality, or things helping data quality actually would also be big gains. So if machine learning could help us in those aspects, that would be great.
So first of all, I would like to add that TextNet is one of the networks that use machine learning for real-time operations. So we don't use it for the whole state, but for 2 regions that we have high seismicity, we use it in parallel with STA-LTA. We use it similar to the way that Frederik showed earlier. So we have our own EQCCT machine learning approach. It runs with 60 seconds of data with an overlap of 30 seconds, and it feeds every results to SISCOM. So we have the messaging system take over of the final location. It has improved a lot the margin of completeness compared to the STA-LTA, and also when the analysts, they review the events, it improved because we have improved peaks, so the time they need to finalize the event, it's much less now.
Okay, thanks. Last question, comment.
Yeah, so what I've heard today is a sense that the machine learning is really exciting for the scientific community, but it's very, I think the community is nervous about relying on it, needing the reliability that current catalogs have. And is a pragmatic solution for this to just kind of have one catalog that is the reliable catalog and an experimental catalog that exists alongside, and with the sort of understanding that this is something that is still experimental, and I think as it gets deployed, the failure modes would arise and the community could deal with them. But it would be sad that we don't get to use the data because we're so nervous about how it could fail. And it doesn't seem like the actual operational costs are the main hurdle. It seems like concerns about reliability are the main hurdle.
Yeah. I'd like to respond to that. I think that's what the research community is for. All of our data is open, and you have a chance to grab the data and make whatever catalogs you want, down to whatever magnitudes of completeness you want, using whatever models you want. There is a cost to put any model into operations. You have to make sure the data flows in the right formats. You have to make sure that it's been tested and vetted. You have to make sure that that model, even if we're going to run it on the side, right, it's not going to become our operational model. That all takes people time, computer time, operational time, and now you're going to flood your operational computer where you have to respond sort of immediately with this other task that isn't contributing to operations. And I mean, if there's a funder out there that wants to give us regional networks a lot more money than we get, we'd be happy to do a lot more things, but from a regional network side, our budgets have been flat for several years and inflation keeps going up and we have to pay salaries and do all these things. So yeah, it would be great and yeah, it's exciting, but at the bottom line, right, anything we do on the operational side, there's a lot of downstream costs that are relatively hidden. And I wanted to respond to Clara, why is it taking so fast? Yeah, I think it's partly the 20-year-old software and how we do things, right, and how we get things in, but that also comes back to what I just said. We're really resource limited, and there's a big difference between Caltech and the University of Utah and TextNet, right? You're talking 3 scales of regional monitoring here with 3 different scales of resources, and for me, a lot of it, if you put enough money into it, we can do anything, right? But that's part of the problem right there.
So all those in favor of more funding for regional seismic networks, raise your hand. All right, passed. Frederik.
So, yeah,
He's
if I can add to that a little bit, so I think with the operational networking, it's often about the integration of these automatic algorithms and the human analysis, right? So, and I think also that means that maybe there was the impression that, we either have machine learning or we have STA, LTA. Of course, these things can combine to some extent, and that's what we do. So we kind of introduce machine learning in a repicking sense, that we detect events still with STA, LTA, but then refine them. And we were seeing what the analysts are doing, right? And so what they do essentially is they really enjoyed having much better picks to work with and having to revise a lot less. And I know that we had a meeting with the USGS, that the experience is totally different, that the USGS analysts, that they like to really change almost every pick because they can still do it a little bit better than an automatic algorithm, or at least I think so. I guess it's very specific, but I think in the end, the sort of human-machine integration is what makes this quite feasible also, I think, to introduce these algorithms.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that the reason we can do all these methods is because we have these massive labeled data sets that have come about from the hard work of hundreds of people around the world, manually looking at these seismograms and quality controlling them and so on and so forth. So this has been a really stimulating panel. I mean, it's gone exceedingly well. I'd like to thank the SSA for allowing it to happen, for organizing it. I'd like to thank our panelists for doing such a great job. All right, don't forget to give your microphones back.